All right, good evening, everybody. Give everyone a chance to find their seats. All right, so good evening, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome back Marty Kane, who's giving a presentation on the railroads of Lake Hopatcong. Marty is quite the eminent historian on Lake Hopatcong and is heavily involved in Lake Hopatcong Foundation, which also owns the restored Lake Hopatcong Lackawanna Station, which was beautifully restored by them. So without further ado, Marty, the floor is yours.
Great.
Welcome back.
Thank you so much. And when my compliments, this is like an amazing room. It is just like a super place to have programs. So those of that aren't here in person really should come. This is
Thank you.
okay. And the first thing you might ask is like, hey, how can you do a whole program on like the railroads of Lake Hopatcong? Well, the railroads really created Lake Hopatcong as a major Northeast resort. We had full service from two, main railroads from the 1880s on. And they're the ones that really created what would become a major Northeast resort with some 40 hotels and rooming houses, 2 amusement parks, each with their own roller coasters, and just a plethora of dance halls and other activities. Really, in its day, which would probably we're talking about the teens and the 20s into the Depression, Lake Hopatcong competed with Asbury Park and Atlantic City for that kind of tourism dollars.
Here we go.
Okay, my tech guy is on his way.
Try it now. There you go.
Now it is?
Yeah,
Perfect. Okay, as I said, the railroads are really heavily advertised Lake Hopatcong, and we're going to take a look at each of those tonight, both the Lackawanna and the Central Railroad of New Jersey. And we're going to, kick it off with the Lackawanna, starting from Hoboken. People, a lot of folks that came out to Lake Hopatcong in the early years were coming out from the New York City or from Patterson, Newark, Jersey City, or from New York. You took that ferry over, grabbed that train in Hoboken, and you look at some of the run times then, and some of the trains were getting from Hoboken to Lake Hopatcong in 90 minutes. Like, you can't do that today. So it is pretty amazing, what they were doing in the 1890s. All right, the Lackawanna Railroad, it first came through the area at Lake Hopatcong in the 1850s. At that point, there was no station. A siding was created there, it seems, in the late 1860s, just so the train could stop. But it basically just came right through the area that we would later know as landing. If you were coming to Lake Hopatcong in those early days to the hotels that were there, and by the 1880s, there were 4 hotels already operating at the lake, and it would just, mushroom or just grow exponentially after the railroads came. But the first railroad station was at what back then, if you look it up, it would have been Drakesville. Today we know that area is Ledgewood, but it was really where the Mount Arlington stop would be built. That station that you're looking at is 1892, but there was a station before that. That was the fancy station that the hotels built to welcome the visitors coming in. And it would exist at Mount Arlington until the early 1950s, when it was taken down for lack of use. And it's in that almost exact location where they built the current Mount Arlington station, New Jersey's transit station today. Doesn't have quite that character, but that was a pretty good one. Okay. The railroad, the first station put up at Landing really was put in there in the 1880s. And that's your original station. And that actually is, if you will, the village or the town of Landing that you see behind that. And if you went there today, you'll still find a couple of those houses in existence. Just to kind of get your bearings a little bit, the lake would be over kind of on the back right. just another close-up here of what the original station looked like. Here you can see the original bridge, the one in the forefront that crossed over, basically to get you over the railroad tracks. And in the background, you can see the freight bridge, which we'll talk about a little bit more, but that was a freight service that went along the east shore of the lake. Great outfits, huh?
Yeah.
And even a little telegraph sign for you. Okay, what really made the Lake Hopatcong station for the Lackawanna so unique was the fact that the way they built it out when they built it in the 1850s, that it came just together at the landing area right with the Morris Canal. I mean, as you can see on this early stereoscope or stereo view, all you had to do was get off the Lackawanna Railroad and walk across the platform, and you were at the canal. And it didn't take long when you were starting to develop hotels and other uses of the lake for people to realize, huh, what an easy way to get people anywhere on Lake Hopatcong. Have them come up by rail, have them just go across the platform, get on a waiting steamboat that would go up the Morris Canal, take the feeder canal, which was fully navigable, right onto Lake Hopatcong through the lock, and take you anywhere you wanted to go on Lake Hopatcong, any of the hotels, camping areas, or what we're starting to get, private cottages. You know, here just another view. You know, you can see here, in fact, we're looking straight down the towpath. So there were no mules coming up that point, but you know, it would have been probably very interesting to see at some of the points when the steamboats were coming up the canal and the mules that were towing canal boats had to get out of the way. That might have been a very tricky thing for the parts where they went together. Here again, you got the, if you will, the houses of landing in the background. You know, here you are with the waiting canal boat. I'm sorry, waiting steamboat. And here a little bit closer up, you know, you can kind of tell the late 1890s, very early 1900s, just from the attire alone. And there's that early bridge that would be there until 1907. Yeah, that's an early freight elevator. I don't know how it operated, that freight elevator, but it's early. It would be replaced by those really large freight elevators when they built a new station later on.
Marty?
Yeah.
In the past, in picture two, yeah, I think it's back there again. There's freight on an upper level on the track side.
Yes, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. It kind of where Landing Road is today. That used to be a whole freight spur that was taken out before they built a new station. Yeah, good eyes. You weren't supposed to see it yet. You're supposed to wait for me to tell you it was there.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. And now now, okay, this is the one you really see it clearly. Now keep in mind, the current station is a little bit further west of where the station would exist later on, or where our building is today. And of course, it was down at the track level. So you're kind of on the Netkung side, if you will, of the bridge, and up you can see all above. Trying to find any proof that any of that exists today is really hard, but you see, it had a whole freight spur up above it that hooked in with the other freight spur, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and you can see it just headed off down toward Port Morris. All right, here was the main freight spur that was built. You're now looking eastbound toward what was then called Shippingport. Today we'd say toward Roxbury or toward Ledgewood. And you can see what was coming right off the tracks was this freight spur that would go around the east shore of Lake Hopatcong. And it was actually built in 1897. It was completely wholly owned by the Lackawanna Railroad, but it was called the Hopatcong Railroad, that spur. And it basically served a powder manufacturing plant that existed on the east shore of the lake, which we'll show you a photo of, a large ice house. And then it had some uses for coal. But it was a purely commercial spur until it would later be co-opted into a trolley line for Bertrand Island Park. Yeah. Yes. If you go down today, you know where the parking lot for the Lake Hopatcong station is? That's the part where it was filled in. The canal part was filled in is where you can park today. And if you walk over toward the lakeside, it used to be Tom Valiente's property. He was in construction. You can find the abutments right there. You know, they took them down as far as they needed to. They weren't going to spend any extra money to dig them out. So yes, you can still find them. And, you know, Tom we used to love showing them to you when he was on the property. Yeah. Okay. This was the main reason they needed a freight spur. The American Foresight Powder Company was built in the 1880s. So those of you that know Lake Hopatcong a little bit, it's where Shore Hills is today. The whole development of Shore Hills was basically built on its property. It was built in a time when a large part of the American explosives industry was in northern Jersey. It was a time where Hercules would be built, Picatinny Army Depot would be set up. This was a major manufacturing for items that would be known as Maximite. It's what brought Hudson Maxim to Lake Hopatcong. Basically powders that could be used in the mines, powders that would explode under moist conditions. But because of it, they manufactured a lot of acids like sulfuric acid and things, and explosives. Interesting to have that kind of use right by what would become a large recreational lake, and a reason that eventually in the 1920s they would pack up and leave. But it was known as American Foresight from the 1880s until 1910, and then it would become Atlas Powder, which is still, if you go on to development around Shore Hills today, you'll find like Atlas Road and things like that kind of date from that. It was a major, freight destination for the railroad. In fact, there are a lot of stories about what they would allow them to put on the rail and not put as far as the explosives. They dug into that hill. There were mines up on that hill. If you go into the Shore Hills development today, you'll find some people that you'll talk to and they go, yeah, when I dig in my yard, I hit basically concrete. There's still reinforced bunkers in different places. They didn't really take them out when they developed. Shore Hills was developed right in the years after World War II. Probably today, you'd have to do so much, environmental remediation to redevelop that site. But it was basically left abandoned or, with no real cleanup in the 1920s. And then it sat until after World War II. So like about a little over 20 years later, they just started developing it for a summer resort. The other big need for a rail was the ice house. The largest ice house on Lake Hopatcong was on this spur. It was known as the Mountain Ice House. It was the one that was at Silver Springs. It was a huge building. This is the original one. It would actually burn, which we'll see in a few minutes. And they built the only fireproof ice house on Lake Hopatcong. And at the time, it was so large there that, the newspapers of the day, after it was finally taken down, which reported that it was the largest single girder construction, whatever that means, until Radio City Music Hall was built. So you can take that probably with a grain of salt, but what you can take out of is it was big. And you're talking about, tons and tons of ice that would be stored there. And this was a point when Lake Hopatcong was a major source of ice, had 4 major ice houses on the lake, one very close by over at Duck Pond, which we know is Lake Shawnee today, major part of the ice industry, and you needed rail to get the ice where it was going. Lake Hopatcong ice has been traced as far as South America, as far as how far it would travel once it was put onto steamships and all. As cargo, kind of a whole interesting thing by itself. Okay, those of you that collect postcards or have seen postcards, there's a series of this. It was a fire in 1912 of that building you just saw, the Mountain Ice House. People always laugh that ice houses could burn down, but they did frequently. And as you can see, the heat was intense enough to bend the railroad tracks but the ice was still there, the mountains of ice behind it. So yeah, photographers had a really good thing in it. There are about 6 or 7 different shots that you'll come across of this.
Why did they burn down one?
I think it a lot, well, up at Lake Hopatcong, there was, there were a couple that were, investigated, we'll just say. But you remember, they wrapped the ice with, basically, just, hay or, sawdust. So very flammable materials. Whatever electric went into it, I'm sure wasn't to anything close to code. And there was a couple of issues where a couple burnt down that seemed very suspicious in origin, when there was a issue going on with the Brady ice houses having problems with their employees. Early labor issues. So yeah.
Don't burn the place down.
Okay, 1907, Lackawanna, a new bridge is built. That little bridge that you saw on top is replaced by this really sturdy, massive structure. And you notice it has the 2 openings. It's the bridge that's still there today. One opening for the canal, one for the Lackawanna. Just another shot of it to you can see it. But why was this so important to build this bridge? And that was because of the trolley. The trolley arrived in 1907, the Morris County Traction Company. Obviously, you needed a really substantial bridge to handle the trolleys. It looks like that was opening day, that all the guys were taking credit for it, came by to have their photo taken. But they built that one close. You can still see the old bridge in the background, before they took it down. And that's the bridge, as I said, it's still there today. It will be taken down within the next few years. They've been working on a project to remove it since 1997, but now they're getting really close, where they've acquired the properties, even a piece of the property where the old Lackawanna station is. That was our property. They've taken the corner of to build a new road and a new station. So the new bridge. And here you can see the trolley came right here into landing over that bridge. And the reason we kind of like to show it, and also you'll notice that dock that goes out, that was a white line steamer dock. That was so if you took the train and you did not want to take the steamboat crossing the platform, in 1890, they gave you a second way of doing it. There was another company set up. It was called the Hopatcong Steamboat Company, or we just called it the White Line at the lake. And their boats would be right at that dock. So you just came up that staircase, your luggage could come up those freight elevators that would be built, and you could go right out on the lake that way. But was kind of also what this bridge did was it took from 1907 to 1910 to get permission to use the track from the Hopatcong Railroad, because the trolley was looking for, as trolleys did, for some reason that people would use the trolleys on weekends. So at Lake Hopatcong, they said, hey, we'll make Lake Hopatcong the end of the line, and we'll connect it up with a beach. So people will come here to go swimming on weekends. The problem was they were able to get the bridge built. They made their peace with the railroad to get that bridge built, but they couldn't get the Lackawanna to allow them to use the track past American Foresight and past the Mountain Ice Company. Finally, in 1910, they resolved their differences. Whatever they made up economically worked. And that started the service to a place called Bertrand Island. And Bertrand Island started as a swimming beach. And before you know it, it had a dance hall. It had a shooting range. It had a steam powered carousel. And, it basically turned itself into the classic trolley park, a full scale amusement park at the end of the trolley line. The trolley would serve it into the 1920s, although there was a break during World War I, where they had to discontinue the trolley service to the park because it was interfering with the explosives and things coming out of them at that point, Atlas powder. But that's how really Bertrand Island got its start. Bertrand Island Park. A lot of you that are old enough remember it. Actually, this year we'll celebrate the 40th anniversary of its last season. but it was a major amusement park in this area.
You said there was 2 amusement parks. What was the other one?
The other amusement park was at Nolan's Point, and we're going to talk about that because it owed its existence to the Central Railroad. Traffic was good at Landing, as you can see. The old station really couldn't handle the traffic it was getting once the resort started developing. As you can see, there's just some great shots of the people, boarding the train here. And there you can still see up on above, they still had the freight line at that point. So what happens is they start talking about the concept of the Lackawanna cutoff, which really, it didn't involve Lake Hopatcong per se. It started, if you will, like 1,342 feet west of the Lake Hopatcong station. So this mammoth project, which is, at that point, like $11 million, which was a staggering sum of money. And it took 3 years to plan and 3 years to build. Somewhere along the line, someone said, we really need a new train station up at Lake Hopatcong. And just like to show you that we just didn't invent this idea today. They just kind of buried it in the project. It wasn't that much money to bury another $80,000. And it just got buried in the Lackawanna project to put in a new train station for Lake Hopatcong and the resort. And that's pretty much what happened. They're building this massive Lackawanna cutoff. And and just to go back one more time, I love the fact that when you look at the old Lackawanna line, how it followed the Morris Canal all the way down to as far as Port Colden before it started coming north again. It's amazing how they chose the Morris Canal to follow. And then of course, when they really wanted to make the efficient and save the time, and they came up with that unbelievable idea of basically building it in a straight line, no matter what was in the way. And that's what you got. But the one thing that really interests us was because with our train station is they really pioneered the use of reinforced concrete with a lot of what they did with the Lackawanna cutoff. And that's what you see both in the train stations at Lake Hopatcong and at Mountain Lakes, where they used so much of the concepts of the reinforced concrete in their construction. So that was the train station they came up with for Lake Hopatcong as part of the Lackawanna cutoff. And indeed, it was built in the same timeline, but they wanted to get it open, as many of you know, the Lackawanna cutoff opened on Christmas Eve, 1911. They wanted to get this station opened in time for the 1911 season. They didn't want to miss the summer, and that's what they did. It opened in May 28th of 1911. And here it was, the first issue of the Breeze that year was happy to feature our brand new station. And as you can see, and you'll see it on all photos, 2 really big freight towers, freight elevators. And they really set the whole site up around the canal and around it. And if you will, the earlier station was further west, in other words, to the right, going down to the track. And you'll also notice, you can see the trolley just in the edge of that photo. That's the station they built. That's the one that is the home of the Lake Hopatcong Foundation today. Opened, as I said, in May of 11. It looks like this was the setup photo. Everybody was in place for it. And it really did. I mean, it was a center for a remote area of New Jersey. I mean, it really was a center for, steamboats on the canal, steamboats a block away coming up to meet trains, the trolley all the way over there on the right, and of course the Lackawanna Railroad. You had, 3 major sources of transportation kind of meeting at this one place at Lake Hopatcong. And it was somewhere in this period they started calling it Landing. You try finding out where the name started. It definitely had to do with the canal, just like the port towns. And this one just picked up the name Landing along the way. And it stuck. Oops. Let's go back. Here again, just a little different view, but you can see the nice waiting area, how it was set up. And, just there's your canal boats waiting for the train to come in. And right up on the upper left-hand corner, just so you know, we had that classic hotel right at the train station. You know, there were about 40 hotels on the lake, but there was one right across the street. So if you took the train, you go right up across the street. And it was, for those of you that know the area today, it was where the hardware store is, but that whole hill back there. Just a few more stats because you're a railroad people, so you like seeing railroads. Okay, here you can see the freight spur down on the east shore of the lake. The train station's there. That freight spur would remain. It wasn't actually taken out of commission until 1939. And that was basically because the Atlas powder stayed until the 1924. The last ice was harvested at the Mountain Ice House in 1934. There was a use for it until then. And then in 1939, they filed to have it decommissioned. But as you know, Lake Hopatcong, if you think of Landing Channel, as you go down, all those houses between, let's say, Landing and all the way down toward Silver Spring, all houses built after 1939, because otherwise you would have been building on the railroad track. They needed that track to come out because the track used to really go right along the lake there. And here's a trolley with the new station. And so you also, same thing, you get your place as to how things sat. Like on this one, you can see, okay, I see the train station. I know exactly where the freight spur was now. Same thing here. The trolley track was kind of across the street and it went right around. The original trolley track actually went much further to the right, but when they built a new station, they made them move the trolley track over. And here you have it. Today, that's where the old Terry's auto repairs was. It was a Gulf station for many years and all that, right on that side. And here's just another nice view that was taken by the railroad, because you don't normally see a view like this. So you can get the picture of, boy, you had that big staircase up, and that staircase is still there on that hillside. Unfortunately, the newsstand, which you see right over here, they had moved the newsstand around. It was some kind of nice thing they had done. All this is collapsed today in the woods below us. Our property line is right up here. This is all this is still owned by now New Jersey Transit. But it really gives you a good idea of how this station was set up. You walked straight through. So if like you were dropped off in front, you walked right down and either went down the staircase or you came up here and you crossed over on the bridge over. And this was just all an opening. And if you needed to go in and get a ticket, then you went through a door here or you went over here to the freight room. Yeah.
Is that a tunnel portal to the left of the newsstand?
Yes, it was just it just kind of went in and then you went up the staircase. It just kind of, I don't know why exactly they built it that, but yes, you went in, you went up a staircase, then you went up another staircase. And if you didn't want to go that way, there was a big ramp that you could go up. You may have seen in some of the other photos where there were several ways they would take you down there. And you could, I don't know how they handled passengers onto freight elevators, but there were elevators.
And
Yeah.
one more question, when did they take the bridge?
We're going to cover that because I'm going to show you the sad story. Nah, it's good. Here again, you know, nice, much nicer area for people to wait in down below, and you get a full sense of, you know, the freight elevators and also the walkway across. When they built this, the elevators and all this area cost like $35,000 and the building itself cost like $8,000, you know, just to give you an idea of, so most of the money was spent in the other part. Okay. Unfortunately, as was the case with railroads, you know, they weren't really great. Once you hit the Depression and the years after, the maintenance, you just start seeing the photos. You know, I know you folks are really into railroads. You see this everywhere, but you know, you're just going to see a series of photos now that just show the whole area starting to decline. Everything from the landscape where they used to keep it all really neat and down to the surface, to the buildings themselves, and of course those towers starting to deteriorate. starting to get pretty nasty looking down there. Like when I was a kid, one quick way to get a whooping from your parents was to let them know you were playing around this area. Between the bums that were supposed to be there and the fact that things fell off regularly, it just was left in real disrepair. And some of them you start seeing open holes in them later on. So that led us to 1982, which is when they decided it was such a nuisance and it was falling down in chunks that they sent in the equipment and they removed everything there. The only thing they left was the building itself, which was at that point had been rented out by Conrail and already was, not serving as a train station. In fact, it appears the ticket office operated as a ticket office until 1958. And it's a little unclear what they used the building for in the 60s. I mean, it was still open, but it just seems like they just didn't really sell tickets there. And in the 70s, Conrail, started renting out the building itself. And for many years, those of you that, go back that far, like Hopatcong, remember it as a real estate office. It was Time Realty for a bunch of years. Then it was Ted Miller. And, after that, it was a hardware store and then a furniture store. Yes, yes, they did. In fact, it was actually when it was the real estate that they had the fire. He had a potbelly, there was really no heat in that building. That as a train station, it had a potbelly stove in it, and that was the whole heat. So I guess they had put a stove right by the entrance, and they put it up to the roof, and I guess it had one of those where exactly. And the fireman that hit it said if it wasn't a stone building, the whole building would have been gone. But it burned a pretty big hole in the roof, which was when we restored the original tile roof to it. That was one of the fears that, you go, wow, hey, it supported a tile roof once before, it'll support it now. But since they had redone that area, they had to go back and really kind of reinforce that whole area.
But then I thought the fire started when it was the furniture store.
No, it was, we were told it was a real estate guy, and that was what we were told. And I know the volunteer fire department have stories about it. I can't swear to it. We found the debris afterward. I had never known that there had actually been a fire in it, living in the area, but there had been. So that led to, in 2014, the Lake Hopatcong Foundation bought the building. It had been for sale at that point for a couple of years. And I have to admit, we were a very young organization at that point. And we weren't really looking to buy a building at the lake, but rumors started that there was someone very interested that was going to knock down the building. They just wanted the site. And I don't know, we took it to our board, and our board decided to kind of take a leap of faith, because it was unusual for a building like Hopatcong in that it had a lot of space and a lot of parking. I mean, not so much space inside, but a lot of space associated with it. So thanks to Morris County Historic Preservation dollars, we undertook the restoration, the planning and then restoration of the building, which, as you know, and Mike Delvecchio gets credit for this photo, taken after actually one of your meetings. He went outside after we hosted one of your meetings there and took that photo. It's still one of our favorites. And we use it now as basically a community space. The left part, which was the freight area, that part closest to you, is our office area today. It's so funny when you walk in it. The stonework is like, if there was a mason, he was the D mason in there. They did not waste any money on the freight area. It was this really rough stone. And then the area that the public came through is just beautiful. It's just so funny to see the different style. The middle of the building, we just use as a kind of little reception area, and the right side of the building, which was the hall, or the main hall, or the waiting room, or we had the benches put back, basically rebuilt and put back exactly where they were. We did the best we could with the tile. The only thing we really had to change a lot in there was there used to be a step up to go into the waiting room. You climb 2 little steps. So now the building's all on one level. We made it the same level as what the waiting room was, which took all our accessibility issues off the table and allowed us to run all our 21st century appliances like internet and all under the floor where you don't see everything running on the surface. But it's a wonderful building. It's like 2,400 square feet, no basement, unfortunately, and no usable attic. So what we're going to do is right where we're kind of standing right here now, we're going to put in a new structure. We're just waiting for Roxbury approval, which we're supposed to be before them May 17th, and it'll look like a railroad building that would have been built around 1910. We have some plans for it. There used to be an actual building across the street that they used to use. So we're kind of recreate that, and that'll be our little storage building. And hopefully people will go, oh, you have that building too restored? You know, like it won't look like a new building to people.
But you would take it part of the corner then, for the road, right?
Yeah, that's why it's gonna be right here. Yeah. We won't have those spaces there anymore. That's gonna be our little building. It's not gonna be that big, but it'll give us, okay. A lot of resorts had one railroad that went to them. What really set Lake Hopatcong apart was it had a second railroad, and that was the Central Railroad of New Jersey. And they're the ones that really started, if you will, the resort here at Lake Hopatcong. But it didn't start as the Central Railroad of New Jersey. It started as a 10-mile long iron mine railroad known as the Ogden Mine Railroad. Basically, the whole idea was to build a railroad from the mines of northern New Jersey, where we had the biggest concentration of iron ore in the country until the Mesabi Range was discovered, and bring it down to the Morris Canal, because those mines were located. It was just impossible to really work with horse and wagons to bring your iron ore. So the idea was to build a railroad to connect the mines to the Morris Canal. Probably, I don't know if you folks know of any other instance where a railroad was actually built to connect to a canal. It very, interesting situation there. To connect, same thing, right? To connect to, and it worked out, it worked well for basically 15, 16 years before they realized there was an extra piece there. And we're going to look at that. Okay, here's Lake Hopatcong for you. And it's kind of to understand why the Central Railroad built the way they did and why everything came about is, okay, and just so you know, this is the state park, that's Bertrand Island, and that's looking north toward Woodport. The mines are all up in this area, not really in view. Maybe you catch this one over here, the Hurd mine, but you had the big iron ore concentration, Hurd, Weldon, Dodge, Schofield, Ogden mines, Ford mines, all up that way. And they used to bring that by horse and wagon. They would bring the ore down to this area, the northernmost part of the lake, which was owned by the guy by the name of William Wood, and they called it Wood's Port, which is why we still call this area today Woodport. So they bring it down on, and they would literally load it onto canal boats, and they would, by steam tug, drag those canal boats all the way out to the Morris Canal, which was located where the state park is today. And they take it out to Feeder Canal and onto the main canal. It wasn't a very efficient process, but that was what they used. And it was better than, trying to take it by horse and wagon the whole way out. They started thinking about the idea that, we need a railroad to connect up these mines once you started getting rail. But it was a lot of money, and it took really the Civil War to kind of break free the money that was needed. Civil War breaks out. They need lots of iron ore. They decide, finally, they chartered a railroad. It doesn't get completed until 1866. The Civil War is over. It misses it, but they have now a 10-mile line, and they bring the railroad down basically from all these mines straight down along the lake, and they ended up right here at Nolan's Point. Why did they pick Nolan's Point? It's the deepest water part of the lake. The lake is about, captains, how deep is the lake off? 63 feet. So, I mean, that's the deepest water. Rather than, up in here, even today, there's real shallow parts of the lake. And now they've removed a lot of the stumps. Back then they hadn't. So they bring it down here, And then they have a straight shot to take it out by canal. Here again, they would put it on canal boats. They bring them over here by a steam tug, and they drop them off here at the canal. And we're going to take a little look at that. Here you go, the Ogden Mine Railroad, the original 10-mile long railroad from the Ogden Mine, which some of you will know is the Edison Mine, because that's what it was renamed when Thomas Edison took it over and did all his work up there. As you see, single track railroad. Cut really straight from Sparta Mountain to Lake Hopatcong. You had to get over part. That's we would know as Esplanade Bridge today. Actually, that exact bridge, the railroad bridge, is a little back from where the railroad is. But for those of you that know the lake a little bit, if you go into the area of the lake known as the canals, you go in kind of behind a couple marinas, and you have to go through an area where there's a couple of poles that they've cut them down slowly over the years to make it a little wider, but you still see those original poles sticking out of the water from that bridge. You would, here it comes straight down toward Nolan's Point. Here you go. You're getting to Nolan's Point. You're starting to see more activity. And here you are at Nolan's Point, and that was the Ogden Mine Railroad, the earliest photo we have of it. I apologize for its quality. And here you can see, early on, it's so funny. They had the railroad track there, and then you see camp pastime. The residents just mixed right in there, or the campsites. Early housing, the reason I show this from the Ogden Mine Railroad, they built housing. One of those buildings is still there today. If you come out of the Windlass Restaurant or the Jefferson House, right kind of where that road meets, and you look behind there, that building still sits today. It's the old living quarters for the Ogden Mine Railroad. They had to supply them with housing. Very early photo of the ore dock. This is the ore dock they built. So the train came down, brought the ore, they loaded onto, looks like canal boats, right? And these were what would be towed over by a steam tug over to today's state park, but really where the Morris Canal was at the Morris Canal Lock. And here's the one good photo we have of this operation. Here you see the Ogden Mine Railroad, the ore dock. For those of you that know the lake a little bit, you almost have the view as if you're sitting in a Jefferson House restaurant looking out. And if those of you that know the lake, this is going to be the 5-year drawdown this year. So if you go there in the fall and you stand in the parking lot of the Jefferson House restaurant, you will see the entire, oops, uh-oh.
Is that amusement park when they, put the tree top there?
Ooh, okay.
Is that
The
amusement park ride up tree tops there?
No, not yet. It would come later on, and but this whole top, when they removed all this, they took all the lumber and everything, but they never dug out. So when we go through the drawdown, you see this the exact ore dock, sits there. In fact, even when you get lower water, if the water goes down, what would you say, about 2 feet, it starts popping up. You have problems. So you have to be very careful in this area, but that's what was there. The main ore dock for all those iron mine railroad, all those iron mines and the Ogden Mine Railroad.
That building you were talking about before, wasn't that a hotel? That one that you said was for the employees?
No, that was always this housing. The hotels were on. There were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hotels all around it, though. And
Okay.
Yep. And here you go. Okay, what happens? The Ogden Mine Railroad runs to that ore dock from 1866 to 1882. Major source of cargo for the Morris Canal during those years. In fact, overwhelming amount of the cargo is coming through Lake Hopatcong in those years. Well, railroads are expanding in the country. The Morris Canal only operates still seasonally. You're still dealing with a limited amount of cargo you can bring out. So it didn't take long for them to want to connect up the railroad to the main line. And that's what happened. The fall of 1882, They complete the Central Railroad. What happens is the Central Railroad leases the Ogden Mine Railroad for 999 years, takes over the operation, and here you go from, Lake Junction, Hopatcong Junction, all that you folks know far more than I do. They build a line straight out to Lake Hopatcong, a line that you can still walk along today, very easy to follow. Along the way, they stop to do some developments. You don't see the station at Minisink very frequently, but there was a little stop they built at Minisink along the way to Lake Hopatcong.
Jefferson Senior Center is?
It's where the health center is. Yeah, right there. It was right in that area.
Is that why Jefferson Lumber is where it is?
Yes,
It was served by rail?
the rail went right through the Jefferson Lumber Yard. And you'll see some of the early photos of that with the siding for that. Yes. Yes. My understanding was a lot of it was being moved east. You probably would be more knowledgeable than I on that, but my understanding was a lot of it went to the industrial cities east. Yeah. My understanding was they weren't sending it out. The iron ore wasn't going out to, but I have to admit, I am no expert on that part of things. So I'd hate to give you an answer that was wrong. Okay, here you see the track coming in. For those of you who know Lake Hopatcong, this is a location of the Jefferson House today. Much bigger structure in the day. What happened was when the Central Railroad of New Jersey started their passenger service, you needed to give people something to do. They were coming out here and we'll take a look at these excursion trains that were bringing people out, bringing out thousands of people in a day. So they built 2 large pavilions around Nolan's Point. This was the second one that was built. It was known as Lee's Pavilion, no relation to the other Lee's at the lake, like Lee's Beach, but Lee's Pavilion. It was a huge structure there. Everything from the first Chinese restaurant on the lake to dance halls to, stores, ice cream parlors, tremendous thing.
It's a mall.
It was a mall before there were malls. Yes, exactly. And then over right around the corner where the windlass restaurant and everything is there today was the first one that was built. And we're going to take a look at that one because that's where you came in. You took the Central Railroad out from Jersey City. Basically, you pulled in here and they said, you're at Lake Hopatcong. And this is what you saw, as you would get off the train. It was another large pavilion known as Allen's Pavilion. For those of you that do know the lake a little bit, this area right here is where the windlass restaurant is today. Is this you're kind of looking out straight along to, toward north on the lake, basically. And here's just a viewpoint from the Castle Rock area of Lake Hopatcong, kind of looking back toward Nolan's Point. And you can see how, the trains would just pull up in here and they'd pull on one of those, tracks and they wait. And here, what do you see? Bathhouses, bathing pavilions. It wasn't considered appropriate to wear your real clothes, bathing suits. So you went into one of these, you changed your clothes, you came out in your bathing attire, and then you would change back into those full clothes when you're done. So it was all at the edge, but here's swimming area and then all the other things. And you'll notice one thing over there, right next to it, a really large ice house, which made it really convenient because what was that? When they first, Central Railroad was thinking cargo, they were thinking iron ore and they were thinking ice. Here's, the whole ice thing. And, even if you look behind in the background, you will see hotels. It was a real mix of industry and recreation. And there's the ice house you just saw from a distance. There it is, the ice cars. In the souvenir guidebook of 1898, they reported that 3 or 4 long ice cars leave the lake every day in the summer. So that was a major industry going, because, we think of the railroad for the other cargo it would bring. But when they really started it, the whole thing was iron ore and ice. But that led to the other cargo they decided that they could bring in, and that was people. And that would dominate in the years that followed was they came up with the idea of running these excursion trains, and they, particularly on weekends, there was regular service. Regular service started in the spring of 1883. I told you a train got there in the fall of 82. Spring 83, they start regular service up to Lake Hopatcong. It's on all the things. But the big thing was they ran these excursion trains. Newsstand right at the as you got off the train. Some of our hopeful employees. So if you came down, this would be, you'd come down the train, you come down that hill, just like if you know Nolan's Point today, it's that hill's still there. You still have to come down that hill. You'd come down. You know, you had the station and you had the pavilion. When you got down there, you found a whole bunch of shops. You could have your photos taken. You had some games you could play. You had a movie theater. The first movie theater on the lake would be built down at Nolan's Point. You know, it was a place you could take the excursion and spend the day. The idea was to give you enough to do while you were there. Dance hall, food, beer. And then you had the docks. For those of you who know the lake a little bit, you're looking right out toward Halsey Island. But these are docks. And for those of you that know the docks at Nolan's Point, they haven't changed a lot. They're basically the same structure that was built there in the 1880s, where the Miss Lotta cruise boat comes in today. If you look when you're coming in, you know, that part to the north, it's all those docks that were just, you know, been changed a little bit over the years. Yeah. Dow? You mean Dow? Dick Dow, no, that was right around the point. And a little bit later on. These were just rentals from Allen's Pavilion. But yeah, you're dead on. It's just a little bit around and they would come a little bit later. And the steamboats came in there. You came by train, you wanted to go somewhere else on the lake, you wanted to go to your cottage, you wanted to go to your hotel, you didn't only come in at landing. Both steamboat companies serviced the lake, the white line and the black line were both here, including the double-decker Hopatcong you see on top. There were, you know, or things like the Uncle Dan. So, I mean, you could come here by train and go right out on the lake. And if you went up the track a little bit, they started setting up amusements. And it was the precursor to what would come later on with a full-scale amusement park. But at the beginning, it's just started. And if you walk along there today, you'll find that rock. You know, that rocks don't go anywhere. But as you can see, you know, you had the carousel, you had some early amusements starting to be set up here. And of course, people loved taking their photos with the trains. It's like some things don't change.
When did the amusement park close?
Well, what happened was amusement started in this area here. It was when the ice house closed next door that someone got the idea to build a full-scale amusement park at Nolan's Point. Oops. And here you see, what do you see behind it? A roller coaster. Okay, what happens is the ice house in the 1920s, it's not that people suddenly got refrigerators. It's more they started making ice electrically in the city. So they didn't need to start the big harvesting operations. This was one of the first ones to close. And basically they sold the land of that and that pavilion you saw, Allen's Pavilion, to something called Nolan's Point Amusement Park. It was, they built this entire amusement park, roller coaster, a dance hall that could handle 1,000 people. That had featured the Meadowbrook Orchestra, Frank Daly and the Meadowbrook Orchestra before he ever bought the place in Cedar Grove. He started here, had a whole midway, had games, had all kinds of rides. The problem was they opened it up in 1928. You know, and they had borrowed a lot of money to build it. So it has 2 really good years. and then you get into the depression. You know, they get 28 and 29 in the seasons. And then by 31, it goes bankrupt. It reopens, goes bankrupt in 33 and closes for good in 34. Bertrand Island opened in, it opened when the trolley first got there in 1910 to a small degree, but they always traced it from 1921 when Mr. Krause bought the park and started building a lot more. See, this park at Nolan's Point was built all at once. Bertrand Island came slowly over time and evolved more into an amusement park. So there you see, great shot of the train with the roller coaster, but the roller coaster only ran for about 5-6 years. It was finally taken down in 1940. And at that point, it had become an eyesore at the lake. But there we talk about the excursion trains. The excursions really, for $1, you know, it was the excursion, and they had so many of them. And I'll have to get with you on some of those excursion brochures that we have. But the excursions, regular train service to Nolan's Point ended in 1928. But the excursions continued through the 30s. In other words, they were just, you know, private trains that went out there, just not regular service. The last one we found evidence of is 1940, with tracks. You know, we didn't really realize they had gone that late. And then in 1941, they petitioned ending rail service there. And that was the end of it. And they started taking up the track in 41. I'm sure parts of it went to the war effort. So that really kind of ended this railroad portal, if you will, to Lake Hopatcong. So as we kind of move on tonight, we have our folks kind of wishing you a hello and a goodbye. And
Marty, back up. What was going on? What's with the steam engine? It looks like it's all ice.
it was a big snowstorm in 1914. So you're going to have to find out what storm happened in March of 1914. But it looks like they had some issues. So as they kind of head for home at the end of the day, we get to say goodnight because they're leaving, we're leaving. Thank you. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Marty. And if anyone has any questions on the Zoom, I'm happy to moderate them for you. But if anyone has any questions on Zoom, please drop them in the Q&A. Does anyone have any questions in the audience? Yes, Lloyd.
Lower part of where the Lackawanna freight tracks came off and went northward, that was, so they shared the track with Morris County Traction, is that it?
They did. They shared the track with the Morris County Traction Company. And as I said, it worked fairly well until World War I came about. And then they were excluded from using the track because of the heavy train traffic coming in for war supplies. And by the early 1920s, the buses replaced the trolley as across the county.
Any other questions from the audience? Oh, we have questions online. From Christopher Johnson, is the Morris Canal still visible next to the Lackawanna station, or was that filled in?
It was filled in there, but if you go a little bit east of there in Shippingport, there is a couple of places you really can see it, including one of the planes, the bottom of the plane. The stonework is beautiful. You can still see a couple of the wading ponds over in Shippingport. And as you go along near where Cliff's Ice Cream is on the that side of the road, you can see very clearly remains of the canal all the way in up into what they call Canal Park in Ledgewood. So not right at the lake there, because unfortunately that was all asphalted over. And if you go over toward where the old Pathmark or Grand Union Shopping Center is, there's a couple of places you can see little pieces of it, but that's a little bit harder.
Okay. Question from Michael Carling. Are there any remnants of the Morris County Traction Company at the lake?
Ooh, Not that I'm aware of, except at the Lake Hopatcong Historical Museum, where we have tracks, we have badges, we have some items of that nature from that was salvaged from the traction company. But you know, when I was a kid along Route 46, it would always keep working. The tracks would work their way up through the pavement. And I guess, you know, over the years, they've put so many layers of pavement down, it just doesn't happen anymore. You see it in Wharton, you see it in Ledgewood. They never removed a lot of that track. I think a lot of it's still down there, but no, there's nothing at Lake Hopatcong that I can think of where you can really actually find any trolley remains other than the bridge they built.
Okay.
That bridge was built by the Morris County Traction Company for the trolley, and it's still there until they take it down.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you still see parts of the traction come right before Bertram Island, going down into Bertram Island there. You still see the.
That's a very good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. You used to see it actually even better before they put the sewer line in there. You used to see it really clear. That is an excellent point. Thank you. If you go along Mount Arlington Boulevard, right after you get past Silver Spring, there is a place before you hit the Bertrand Island Road. If you look over there, you can see where the single track used to go down toward Bertrand Island. That's an excellent point. And like I said, it used to be actually a lot clearer before they messed it up with the sewer line, but you can still see it. Yeah, the Richard Nixon School. I don't think you can see any of it there anymore.
A couple more questions from Zoom from Jeffrey Gabriel. Do you know when they built the third and fourth tracks on the Lackawanna through Landing?
I do not.
Anyone in the audience know? Fortunately, don't know that one, Jeff. And Jeffrey's second question, did the freight tracks at Landing run parallel to the passenger trackage up to Port Morris Yard?
On the photos we've seen, I don't know how far they went. I think they kind of cut into the main line before that. But they definitely headed straight down parallel toward Port Morris. I just don't think they went down that far. Some here might know that.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes, Bill.
In this particular photo, did the trains come in from the north and then they came into the station, people got off, and then it was a dead end, was it?
They had a turntable over by where I'm sorry, I'm gonna get away. They had a turntable over by Shaban's, which is a bar. I hate to use that as my reference, but over by there, they did have a turntable.
So they came in from the north, turned the engine around and went back out.
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Marty.
Thank
for a
you.
wonderful
Thank you.
presentation. And lots of great compliments came in online, so we really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
It's nice to share Lake Hopatcong with you. Come visit us this summer, and we have a couple of the captains from the Miss Lotta Cruise Boat. They can take you out and show you around.
Absolutely. And thank you for being our first presentation, this lovely this facility.
Oh, thank you for asking. The
very
museum is open if you want to see the traction materials or a lot on the railroads. We're open actually Saturday from 11 to 2. So this Saturday is a perfect time. We're also open during the block party from 10 to 4. The Lake Hopatcong block party is coming up. The Lake Hopatcong block party, Lee, funny you should ask, is on May 20th, where we really get to feature the lake. And you also can make appointments if you want to get in there. We just go online to the Lake Hopatcong Historical Museum website.
All right.
Thank you, Rich.
Well, thank you, everyone. Our next meeting will be May 11th. We'll be joined by Tom Namath with his LNHR and Susquehanna presentation. Will be joining us here live at the Reynos Auditorium, and we'll also have an option to attend virtually. Thank you and good night, everybody.
Is that okay? Was that too long?